Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. Chuck Morse speaks. What else to talk about with just a few months to go than the presidential election and the candidates who are running? Keith and Towsif have been nice enough to join me this afternoon, both BLS debate coaches. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Yeah, no problem.
So there were three candidates standing since the last time we talked. You've got the capitalist, you've got the socialist, and you've got the establishment insider hack.
The neoliberal.
Wait, which one's the capitalist?
I don't know. What do you think? Let's not even mention the name yet. But you guys are experts on communication and debate. So I want to start by talking a little bit about their respective debating styles and their communication skills, as it were. And let's start with the obvious, that is Donald Trump, since he's the Republican presumptive nominee.
Actually, well, he's got enough.
He just got it
pledged
today.
He
delegates
just got
as of
enough today, but
yeah.
it won't be
Still
official
not
until
ordained,
the convention.
Sure.
And there are still people who are trying to stop it.
Yeah.
But Keith, what do you say about his debate skills? How do you feel when you watch him speak?
Well, one thing that's interesting is in debate, one of the things that we tend to agree to, one of the few rules we really have, is that consistency is important, and that if I can say something and then contradict myself 5 minutes later, it becomes impossible to ever argue with me because I can always change my position to make any argument you make invalid, because I wasn't saying that, I was saying this other thing.
Right.
And Trump manages to, I think a lot of what allows him to be fairly effective is he has very little sense of consistency. He's able to say things that are entirely contradictory and doesn't seem to mind, and so far at least it seems the voters don't really mind that much either.
So he can say two opposite things in the same sentence, almost.
Yeah, or
in the same
slightly
speech.
apart, yeah.
I even saw him do it today when he said, when he's accepting a debate with Bernie Sanders. He did the last night on the Jimmy Kimmel show. He goes, I really don't think that Bernie Sanders is going anywhere. On the other hand, he might win. I mean, but it's like, what? You know, it's like both things going down.
Yeah.
Towsif?
Well, okay. Thinking about Trump, I always think about when I was debating and I was trying to appeal to a lay audience, right? I would always try and make sure I have some kind of central idea that I can rally myself around. And that is something that Trump, even given his inconsistencies, he has been able to focus on this very nationalistic. Like, when I think of Trump, I know, the first thing I think of is Make America Great Again.
Yep.
That is the very first image. He has burned it into my mind.
It's a good
He is
slogan.
very good at branding himself. It comes from his business experience. So I think that's how he's been successful, right?
Sure.
And then the second thing about his debating style that I think is like really effective, and this puts him apart from Rubio, from Ted Cruz, from Bush, right? Is that he has gone through the ringer. He has been criticized every way possible already. Marco Rubio had some state elections. He hasn't gone through the ringer. Ted Cruz has done some crazy stuff in the Senate, and he doesn't get as much criticism as he could. And that came through in the debates, right? Trump holds up under pressure. He's been able to hold himself together, keep a consistent message, and just push these other three candidates into defending themselves and trying to deal with him in a way that they weren't comfortable doing. They just aren't used to being called names or having to deal with the kind of criticism that he's been able to push at them.
I saw an interesting comment about Trump the other day also, that he is, besides the fact that he's doing some of the work that the media should have done with regard to his opponents, he also is doing some of the things that traditional candidates don't do to the opponents. They have surrogates do it. You know, they'll send out Elizabeth Warren to say Trump is a money-grubbing, greedy capitalist.
I don't think you have to send her.
pig.
She'll probably say that
Because Hillary
regardless, but
Clinton won't come out and say that, or Bernie Sanders won't. They have surrogates do it.
Yeah.
But Trump does it himself.
That's true.
And he does it without, any guile. He just blasts it out there. Almost, he turns people almost into a cartoon character.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Is that working for him? Is that appealing, or is it repulsive?
Well, I think part of what's interesting is he has identified one of the major frustrations of the American public in politics, which is that, and this has, I think, been a frustration in politics forever, but it's sort of reared its head a bit more lately, and that's that you can't necessarily trust what you're told by politicians, that they will only say what they think you want to hear. And so Trump has really latched onto that and used that to say things that people are like, wow, you're not supposed to be able to say that. And the fact that he's doing that makes people view it as incredibly authentic, when in reality, I don't know that that's actually the case. And
Right.
so by being outrageous, we are assuming that that outrageousness is also authenticity. I don't know that it necessarily is, but I think he's definitely leveraged that concept very well.
Right. No, I mean, I agree. We don't know ultimately if he is who we think he is.
Well, I don't know
he could
who
either
we
be-
think he is.
Well,
Yeah, it's getting tricky.
you know, we think he's,
Getting
as
tricky.
you said, I mean, he stands for the nation state, national sovereignty, economic sovereignty
Yeah.
when it comes to trade deals.
He reminds me kind of like
Foreign
19th
policy,
century
he's
thought.
kind of a non-interventionist. He doesn't want to see the country involved in continuous wars. You know, he wants to put America
Except
first.
when he does.
Yeah, it's kind of
Right,
Right,
and
but-
he suggests we should commit war crimes and kill the families of people we think might be terrorists. And
Sure.
then he doesn't want
But
high
it's
taxes
not-
on millionaires except when he does.
No,
this
actually,
is the problem I keep
he
running
does.
into.
He does call for raising taxes on the very rich.
Most recently, yes.
No,
but
he's
that's
done that consistently. I've
right.
heard him do it.
There-
He's had different
previously,
schemes.
the tax
Yeah.
plan he put out previously doesn't do that, and then he made statements saying the exact opposite, which is part of, at least
We
for
don't
me,
know.
my
Yeah,
frustration.
we don't know.
there.
But he has said a number of times, people like me need to pay more taxes. And he
Yeah.
says, but yet at the same time, he wants to maintain a flat tax for the middle class.
Which,
Yeah.
and again, the tax plan he put out doesn't match the rhetoric he uses, so we never really know what the
Right.
reality is, which
Well,
is my
that's
big
true.
frustration.
I think, yeah, I like for me when I think about Donald Trump and like finance, I think that he's the only candidate that's a Republican like the last decade and a half that I've heard say we're going to keep Social Security the way it is, right? He said that we are going. He keeps switching back his tax plans from saying we will have a one-time massive tax, we will increase taxes on the rich, we will decrease them in my plans. I think in the end game, if he sticks to his nationalistic idea, I think he will increase revenues because I think that's more nationalistic. That just
Right.
fits more with his general message.
it doesn't match the Republican Party orthodoxy, which I think is a lot of why he had to change that during
Yeah.
the primaries. And I think a lot of politicians definitely tack more to the extreme during the primaries and then have to come back in the general election. But that's usually sort of a painful, tortured process where they try to maintain consistency and say how their positions are all still connected. I don't think Trump feels any compulsion to do that.
Yeah.
I just think he says whatever he believes at that time will be most beneficial to him, which tends to be
he's-
beneficial to him.
But I also think he's a technician who wants to see something work well.
That's probably true.
And he wants
or at least
to-
I think he wants credit for things working
No,
well
he
if he's
actually.
involved.
I think he has done that as a businessman. He's got a record of it. If you read his book, The Art of the Deal, he talks about that. This, finding people and surrounding himself with people who are successful, and then letting them do what they do. And he's already named a few people that he wants on his cabinet, which are very good people.
He talked about national foreign policy
Yeah.
advisors and Supreme Court justices.
And also, Attorney General, he wants Chris Christie.
yeah, that
Which
would be
is
something.
interesting.
Homeland Security, Giuliani, and Health and Human Services, Ben Carson. I think all three are very interesting people. He's very, kind of proactive when it comes to doing these, letting people know what he's up to. But you were talking about like switching positions. Just today, Hillary Clinton. It looks like Bernie is pulling up even with her in California.
Yeah.
Now that's devastating for her.
Not devastating, but
Well,
not ideal. Like she's going.
I think
at
she
this
only
point,
needs like
she-
100 delegates.
Yeah, but
Yes,
the thing is that
it's almost
she's
impossible
already,
for her to
it's
lose.
already looks rotten that she's taken all of these states without winning them.
That's
because
true.
of the delegates.
It's bad optics.
And he keeps winning and winning and winning. But you wake up the next day and you say, oh, how did she get more delegates then? Or she gets
Yeah.
one less delegate. It stinks. And it's not healthy for any, it's exposing a part of politics that most people had no idea even existed. Ted Cruz tried it too. He
Yeah.
was taking entire states without even bothering to have a primary.
Yeah.
The Colorado.
What's the
Yeah,
difference between playing the game and winning it as opposed to actually convincing people?
Actually,
and
having
winning them?
people, people think they're going out and voting and standing in the cold weather and waiting in line to vote, and they think that it means something. We're all of a sudden saying, hey, wait a minute, the establishment is picking these people.
Well, part
It
of the-
doesn't matter what you do.
I think part of the issue there, though, is what the purpose of primaries are, and I think and caucuses, and I think there's a legitimate question there. It's either an opportunity for the nation to decide who the two candidates will be in the end of the day that they get to choose between in November, or it's a way for parties to decide, private groups, political parties, to decide who they wish to support. If it's the latter, then that's not necessarily a democratic process. I don't think it should be that way, but if that's what we believe it to
It's
be.
been exposed as that being.
Yeah.
Like in the Democratic Party with the superdelegates, apparently they did in Jesse Jackson in 1988
That was
in
a lot
favor
less
of
close, though.
Dukakis.
Yeah.
No, because they decided that they didn't want Jesse Jackson. They wanted Dukakis.
They're
I'm
more complicated stuff.
It's
but
more
yeah.
complicated, but we're now seeing it more blatantly.
Sure.
I think
in
Clinton's
this time
strategy has also kind of like pushed her into this like ideal in people's minds because she's kind of using Bill Clinton's old triangulation strategy, right?
Right.
Where she's like Bernie Sanders will be on one extreme, then there's the moderate view, and she will pick that point in between. And that just is feeding into this idea that she is not authentic, that she is not, she is like
authentic.
pure establishment.
And nobody wants that this year.
Yeah, it's not
You
good
know,
optics
either
for this year.
left or right. Nobody wants this kind of hack, bought and paid for by Wall Street. Talk about corrupt. I mean, these 200. She got what was it, $37 million in speaking fees last year, and he got another $37 million.
Yeah.
Who was giving them that money? Now, there's a reason for that. I mean,
Though,
that's why she won't release the transcripts.
Well.
They are bought and sold by Goldman Sachs and these other corporations. I mean, they don't just give somebody a check for $250,000 for just, we want to see you. Not only do they give her a check for $250,000, but they fly her in first class. They have a limousine pick her up at the airport. They put her in a $2,000 a night hotel. They fly her back. People don't get that done unless they're doing something. Goldman Sachs doesn't just hand that money out.
Though it is worth noting that she is far from the only person that receives those sorts of benefits. And I think that we've focused on her more.
I think that it's unprecedented, actually. I know
Really?
I know it's happened. Other people have gotten some. But the Clintons have done this in a way that I think has never been done. They have
I'd be curious to
sold.
see the
I don't
evidence
know
on
about
that.
that. But
We
the thing
could
is,
take a look at the numbers.
I think it's worth looking
Yeah,
at.
all these
should.
people that listen to these speeches, right? And I'm sure there were people that listened to those speeches that were her political opponents, like people who opposed her politics. If these speeches were so controversial and so damning, then one of those people in those speeches would have come out and said something.
Some have already. And
It hasn't made huge waves.
Well,
though.
they've come out. Goldman Sachs has been a few people who took notes, and they're like, basically, what it was is that they said jump, and she said how high. It's like totally like you don't get that kind of money unless you're offering. And not only that, but look, she was Secretary of State. She's going to be the candidate for president. She was trading on her office, and I know there's nothing technically illegal about that, but they're buying time. They're paying her that money because they want influence in the government, and that's what this whole business was about with the private server.
The connection is a
that's a
lot
little
sketchy.
tenuous.
Well, I'll tell you.
I think I'm closer to being on board with you on the Goldman Sachs connection. I'm willing to believe that she, like a large number of other politicians, are very highly connected to Wall Street and to other groups whose industries and whose interests they advance, even if it isn't I'm giving money and therefore I'll do it. I think it's more, I have contact with these people, therefore I am more likely to see the world the same way they do, because they're what form my peer group and they're what inform my decisions, and thus I end up making decisions in their favor. I don't know that there's necessarily corruption. I think there's a decent argument for it in some cases, but either way, I think it ends up leaning things in their direction. The private server thing, to me, seems like more of just idiotic.
Well,
move
why
as opposed
do
to a
you think she
corruption
went
one.
through the effort of putting a private email server while she was Secretary of State? It wasn't just because she felt like talking to her family. I mean,
No.
I actually buy the argument that it was just like, and I think you can relate to me. It's just there was unnecessary bureaucracy surrounding the use of like the actual State Department servers, and I know that previous secretaries of state, I think Collins also.
Well, it was a couple of emails,
Yeah.
but we're talking about he didn't have a private server.
He used like a private email though.
Yeah, but it was just for a few examples of and they weren't classified.
Yeah.
But in this case, according to Peter Schweitzer, who did a book that he researched the private server emails that we do know about, the ones that she didn't already erase, she was making deals with foreign dictators and with multinational corporations.
But you have to do that. You're Secretary
that is
of
the
State.
definition of
But
Secretary
what
of
I'm
State's
saying
job.
is that those deals involved a quid pro quo when millions of dollars would show up
That would
in
be
the
a
Clinton
huge
Foundation
scandal.
and in
How
the
is-
Clinton Global Initiative.
She would be
I think
directly.
Well, that is a
prosecuted for
huge story.
I think what
I
you're
think that would be
alleging,
out, yeah.
I'm surprised that isn't.
It
If that
is
is
being
true,
discussed.
I'm surprised that there isn't much
That would
more
be like
definitive
front page of
substantiation.
New
There's a
York
lot of
Times.
substantiation about it. Check out Peter Schweitzer's book. It's brilliantly documented. It's not been refuted.
When did it come out?
She, for example, it came out earlier this year.
Okay.
She talked to this Russian company.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, they're getting nuclear materials sent.
Oh, I've heard about that.
All right?
Yeah.
Clinton Foundation got X million dollars. Suddenly that shows up in the account. I mean, there's all this connection
Yeah.
between her traveling around.
It's a lot of
She was traveling
correlations, I
around
don't
doing
know.
business as Secretary of State, but she was also doing private business with these foreign dictators, including the dictator of Nigeria, who's not a nice guy. Money going into the Clinton Global Initiative. These things are the biggest slush funds around. I mean, this is why she's
there are
been so
definitely things,
secretive
yeah.
about that private server.
But okay, if we're going to criticize Hillary for a lot of these things, we also need to look at like what's going on the other side, right?
Okay.
Trump is going into the general election. He went through the primary saying, "I am going to pay for myself," but he can't. It would be insane. He can't afford to do it anymore.
Well, he's not going to do
yeah.
it.
And he's already decided.
He's already
isn't-
decided
He
to
can't
start
do it in the
fundraising.
general, and he shouldn't do it.
And so I think that, I'm not sure, but I think it might have an impact on his perception that I am above the corruption, I am above the establishment, when he's going to have to start appealing to like the Koch brothers.
Oh, it's already happening.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Koch brothers are supporting Hillary.
I heard they were pivoting to Gary Johnson.
No, I
Libertarian
think
candidate.
they said they prefer Hillary over.
I think they said they
See,
might prefer
they're no
her.
longer going to be this big enemy of the
Yeah.
left now.
Well, I think
You
part
don't
of the
hear
issue-
that anymore.
No, well,
I've
part of
always
the-
had sympathy for the Koch brothers.
Yeah.
Part of the issue. I
They
think,
happen to
is
be great
The
men.
difference.
Take
I
a look
don't
at
know
the
how to know.
philanthropy they've done in Boston.
Yeah.
David Koch, I mean, look at the skyline at Cambridge.
I remember he
Millions
wrote,
of dollars out of his own pocket to build MIT cancer research, medical research.
Yeah,
I mean,
I can see
he's
that.
done. We have a caller. You're on the air. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, hi. How you doing?
Good.
My question is, if Donald Trump wins, what kind of hell is this man gonna get? Because he can't go to certain countries because he just, excuse my language, he just pissed everybody off. And
He does do that.
it's like this man. I seen some of his rallies on YouTube, and he just gets these people fired up and just. Excuse my language, but he's appealed to the white racist America. That's why he says, make America great again, because he appeals to the white racist people that wants nothing more than to get him in the office.
Well, let me. Why don't we start, Keith? You respond first.
Well, I think that there are a few things that are going on here. One is talking about how Trump would interact with the international community if he were president. And I think that's definitely worth going into. I think the second thing that the callers raised, what's your name, by the way?
Cliff.
Hi, Cliff.
Thank
I'm
you,
Keith.
Cliff.
Nice to meet you. I think the second thing that Cliff raised that's interesting is looking at the nature of the rallies there, and in particular, what issues Trump is trying to play on and where he's trying to gain support. So let's identify and talk about each of those separately. I think the first one, in terms of how he would deal internationally, is actually really interesting, because I think that in some ways, Trump has a capacity to interact with people that is different from a lot of our previous presidents.
Sure.
And he can do so in a different way that in some cases may be beneficial, but I think part of the problem is diplomacy is a really delicate dance. And I think that there's a big risk that a lot of that just gets overthrown and chucked out the window with President Trump, especially because you've got countries like Britain that are not a huge fan of having him come there, and when they are one of our closest allies, that becomes an issue.
They have no right to interfere in our politics, and
fair.
if they want to have a relationship with us, they're going to have to.
Agreed.
To deal with him.
And the point.
Towsif?
No, go ahead.
So I think Trump interacting with other countries is going to be, there's a good and a bad, right? So I'll start with the bad and then move. Obama's been making a lot of international trips recently. He's been going to Japan. He's been going through Asia.
Yep.
Countries, the Japan, South Korean prime ministers are a little concerned when Trump says they should get nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
It's problematic for Middle Eastern and Islamic countries when he's like, let's bomb and wipe out these areas. It's problematic for a relationship with a border country with Mexico. So it's going to be really hard to make sure that our allies have faith in us, because if they don't have faith in us, they look to other regional powers, right? Like if South Korea and Japan decide maybe better relations with China is better for our security, that's a big problem. We can't really jeopardize that. So I think that's the potential downside. The potential upside is there's a huge number of stalemates that are going on right now. Israel, Palestine, North Korea, South Korea. There's a lot of relationships that people know what we're gonna do. So they outthink us. They will be more aggressive because they know we won't react. Obama has a very hesitant foreign policy. So he brings an unpredictability that could be useful.
Sure.
But I think, for me personally, I think the the costs are just too high, too risky.
Okay, let me just say, I think he's going to raise America's profile in the world as with the idea of American exceptionalism, which I think is going to inspire peoples of the world, not necessarily governments of the world. As far as the race card goes, I predict that Donald Trump is going to get peel off a substantial number of black votes and minority votes. I'll point out, for example, in Dearborn, Michigan, the largest Muslim population in the United States, Trump won handily the Republican primary. Trump has Hispanic support. Trump is not going to, the liberal left can't take the black vote for granted this time. You know, Obama, first of all, and I understand he's black. Of course he got the vote, and I get that. That's important.
I think there was more to it.
But there's nobody, I know there is, but the point is, I don't think that, you know, the New York Times went into Trump's business hoping to do an attack piece by saying, oh, he has all white people. And they found out that his businesses and his executives at all levels are very diverse, so they didn't talk about it. He's not into this. He has nothing, you know, this idea that somehow he has something against black men and women, and that his followers have something against black men and women is ridiculous.
Well, hang on. There's a
And
difference
it's very,
between
and it's also
that
very
first statement and
divisive.
the second. I think that there's a difference between saying that Trump has a problem with black people, and I don't know that I'd necessarily back that. I think there is some legitimacy behind saying Trump has identified a thing that a large number of people in the U.S. do believe, subconsciously, if not consciously, which is that, honestly, it's that black people shouldn't have the things they have.
That's leftist agitprop. The left
Really?
is trying, yes, the left is trying to paint him into that as a way to attack him. Just like they attacked Romney for being, you know, wealthy, you know, a successful businessman.
Well,
They're
let's
using
have-
stereotypes of conservatives and Republicans by
That would be a
trying to
lot more
imply that Trump
compelling,
has something
but Chuck,
against
that would be a
somebody.
lot more compelling if we didn't have evidence, anecdotal though it may be, but
What
repeated
evidence?
over and over of his, like the people who gravitate often to him, the examples of things and
Such
incidents
as?
we have at his rallies, neo-Nazi propaganda, David Duke's
does not
endorsement,
help
that
He
kind of
endorsed
thing.
Hillary
Let's look at a
too.
bigger picture, right?
David Duke did not endorse Hillary Clinton. Let's be clear.
Apparently, the Ku Klux Klan, which is an old branch of the Democratic Party,
Oh,
has
this is
come out and
Democrats
said,
before
That's like
Nixon's Southern
way
strategy.
before,
That's
yeah.
not even
and
remotely
this idea
comparable.
that he could be, that this fringe groups have anything to do with Trump, that is a vicious left-wing
Can I- and then
attempt
I'll
to
pass straight over to
smear
you.
Trump and all people that
The
support him,
argument
and
I'm
it's
making,
untrue.
the argument I'm making is not necessarily that he will do their bidding. I'm arguing that he is using that to appeal to those people for the end goal
He's
of
not
advancing
appealing to those
himself.
people.
I think
would-
that's just categorically
no,
wrong. Go
that's-
ahead.
He's not appealing to.
I think if you look at
that's
his big
ridiculous.
picture statement of let's make America great again,
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
the idea, like,
For
America,
everybody.
Sure, but he's hearkening back to some past that was great again, right? Let's make
No,
it
he's looking
again.
at the future.
No. Make it
Let's
great
come
again.
back
When was
and-
it great
In the
before?
image
is the
of
question.
like the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, like those are times when minority groups didn't have much right. That's like predating,
No,
the
I don't
50s
think that's-
predates like minority rights, the 70s predates LGBT rights. I don't think he's an outward bigot, let's put it that way, but I don't think he is going to address the concerns of minority groups. I think he doesn't use black people as scapegoats, I don't think so, but he does use brown people as scapegoats a
How
lot.
so?
Hispanic people, like, if
I
you
reject
call
that.
Mexicans rapists, that's
I
just,
reject that. He didn't call Mexicans rapists. He said that
he
because
said there were
we
like
don't-
3 bad
No,
qualities and some
He's-
are good.
No, he didn't even say that. He said that because we haven't done what any sane nation does,
Mm-hmm.
which is secure their borders in the same way that an individual secures who comes into their home, we have people who are undocumented who are criminals.
But
He doesn't-
actually
he didn't
commit
get
crime
into
at a
it.
rate lower than the American populace on average. Like statistically speaking, the murder rate among undocumented immigrants is lower than it is among U.S. citizens. But we make a big deal out of it because they're scary because they're different.
No,
We're
making a big deal out of it because as any sovereign nation, you know, I mean, Mexico does this as well. Every nation does. You want to know who is coming into the national home and what their intentions
the
are. It
statement
doesn't
that
matter
you're
where
making
they
is
come
far,
from.
far different from the statement that he made,
that's
even
what
if they
he's
go to
about.
the same place. The statement he made is Mexico isn't sending us their best. They're sending us, they're criminals and rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. That's not verbatim, but it's pretty damn close.
He's not,
and that statement,
I understand
the
that, but
connotation behind it, if nothing else, is something that has
you're
to be
reading
acknowledged.
into a connotation.
I don't have to read very far to get there.
He doesn't articulate well, but his issue,
Well,
if you get
hang
down
on.
to it, is that a nation state has a right to protect its citizens by deciding who comes in. and we have standards of who comes in. It has nothing to do with
That's-
But
race
people
or
like
ethnicity.
Ted Cruz,
it has
Marco
to do.
Rubio,
that's a whole different story.
But they're able to articulate that
Right.
without making that kind of
Well,
connotation.
Trump he speaks very crudely.
Well, no, this is
and
a
also,
problem. I
when
don't
he
think we
says
can give
"Make
him a
America
pass."
Great
Yeah.
Again," he means "Make America Great Again" for every American.
But hang on, two things there. First,
Every American.
he speaks crudely thing that becomes
That
a very
matters for
that
the
becomes a
president.
great way to
That's
enable
just
him to
his
say
style.
anything, cherry pick the things you like and not the things that you
have
don't.
to
Not
get
you
used-
specifically,
you have
but
to-
generally
You have to get
speaking.
used to his style.
Well, no, because
He
that's
doesn't-
the sort
he-
of thing that enables consistent contradiction, that enables him to be everything to everyone at the same time, nothing to anyone, which is honestly what terrifies me more than anything about him as a candidate. Is I have no idea who he
You know
is or what he
something?
supports.
I agree with you that that's not exactly on the up and up when a politician can do that. They all do that.
I think it's
I mean,
it
Hillary
is
Clinton just
to
came
a
out with-
different degree in his case.
She's apparently losing in California, so she just came out with a statement saying she's going to give amnesty to everybody.
But she
didn't take
been
that
on that
position
for a
before.
while.
No.
There's
She's
a
completely
difference there
switched it.
between
because she's trying to
changing a
appeal
position
to the
over
Bernie Sanders voters.
There's a difference
She's
between
desperate.
changing a position over time, which I agree has some problems,
Yeah.
but generally I want to believe people can learn and make better decisions over the course of their life. If we locked everyone into what they believed 20 or 30 years ago, it'd be a pretty crappy world. But what I think is different is within the course of a given cycle, within the course of a given week, changing positions multiple times becomes a whole different ballgame.
And when the
Trump's
president,
presidency is going to help all people.
Oh, you're talking
because
about that like it could
it's
be a
going
thing.
to
That
reduce
scares me.
business. As a businessman, he's going to get rid of onerous business regulations.
Yeah, labor
He's
law
going
is
to make,
definitely not something we want.
No, I don't think that's it. All regulations that are onerous to small businessmen, to people trying to start in business,
Such as?
he'll go through all
Overtime
of it.
pay?
No. he's
Okay, so
gonna-
we're not getting rid of overtime pay. What about healthcare?
Well, that's actually a very anti-business thing right now.
Okay, so we are getting rid of
we
businesses
are,
providing
no, not getting
healthcare.
rid of it, but we're going to make it in such a way that people aren't seeing their premiums triple
How?
overnight.
How do you do that?
You do it by basically first of all, you can mandate that people get catastrophic care. And at the same time, you can get the government out of the business and let people